Hi, everybody. My name is Ian Schwarber. I am the co-founder and chief strategy officer of DriveIT. And today we're going to talk about experiential learning and how different perspectives on that and experiences with it can help apply and make things possible in the 21st century gig innovation economy. Before I introduce my two partners here, I was the co-founder of the Excel Center at the University of Akron, which is the Experiential Learning Center for Entrepreneurship and Civic Engagement. We launched that in 2016. My partner, Jeff Hoffman, who's one of the early guys at Priceline.com, and I came together and did some things a little differently there and really had some early success. And pretty soon, we're recognized as one of the top 50 entrepreneurship and innovation centers in the country for some of the things we did, introducing entrepreneurship and civic engagement and business practices through the practice of experiential learning on internships and apprenticeships. And so it's a subject that I'm really passionate about, and I know my two friends here are as well. So Eric, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about where you come from in this space?
Sure. Thanks, Ian. I'm Eric Ward. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at DriveIT, and I spent the bulk of my career in software development. And I was a software architect for many years. About 5-6 years ago, I got into education and started teaching high school, teaching juniors and seniors how to program. And after that, I moved into the boot camp space and worked with the Software Guild with our other founding partner, Eric Wise. And that's really where, those two places that really I got exposed to experiential learning and how powerful it could be. And then after a stint at the Software Guild, where I also worked with Mr. Vanderpool, we started DriveIT, and we're kind of continuing that. So I'm with you, Ian. Very passionate about good educational experiences, learning science, experiential learning, those kinds of things. So this is exciting to talk about. I'll hand it over to Mike.
Hi, Mike Vanderpool. I work as a faculty member at Northwest State Community College doing visual communication, graphic design. I also do some stuff at the Collab Lab at BG and building curriculum here with DriveIT. My background comes from learning by doing my own things, and I think that is what experiential learning is, at least somewhat. And I'm really trying to foster that within the learning experiences that I'm designing as part of the company that I've started, but then also in the classroom as well.
And that's a good segue. Eric, if you were to give a definition to experiential learning as opposed to traditional learning, what would you say are the differences, or what would you say are those terms?
Okay. Well, I think there's a lot involved with experiential learning, but for me personally, the two things that I always keep in mind with that are a hands-on aspect with it, right? So that you're not just, kind of absorbing information, but you're maybe getting exposed to new information, but you're doing something with that information, which is a big piece of it. But I think then there's also a second piece of that goes with it, which is this reflection piece where you do something and then you take a step back, and with the help of, your instructor, facilitator, or the other people that you're doing it with, reflect back on what that means, right? How does that fit into my job? How does that fit into, what I've known before? How am I different now than I was before? And I think that's a critical piece is that reflection piece. So to me, it's those two things, right? The hands-on, and then thinking about how that fits into the bigger picture.
And, I agree with that. It's one of those things that, as we used to say at the university, don't wait till you graduate. That you literally can learn how to do things by doing them and actually making an impact on the real world, and taking these skills and putting them into practice and being able to have something to show for both, your learning in progress, and also kind of some collaborative energies that come from doing things in the real world, in real time with your hands. And I wonder, Mike, is there any examples that you've seen where experiential learning has actually produced some pretty incredible results that have stood the test of time and are actually kind of out there, still moving forward?
Well, from just my own experience as a teacher in the classroom, whenever I design an assignment, and maybe I'm the one who is playing the role of the client, it's never as engaging as when I can find somebody at the college, a program department, or somebody who needs something created in the moment, like a poster for a poetry contest or a logo for a new club on campus. Because I can recreate those type of experiences, real world experiences in the classroom. Having a true outside party being the one that the students are accountable to just seems to make it a much more enriching experience for them. And what I teach in design naturally has this reflection built into it, because you're always critiquing, you're doing mock-ups and sketches and things beforehand, and then you're reflecting on those and some of your thoughts and ideas that went into it before you're finalizing. And then even then you finalize, 3 designs, you're showing those to the prospective clients, getting their feedback, and then taking that information and reworking, tweaking your final piece from that. So I'm fortunate enough because, the nature of what I teach is really experiential by nature. The fact when I can bring in more people from the outside world into being a stakeholder in the project just makes it that much more enriching.
Right. Mike, you said something there that, just kind of brought up a thought with, the fact that with design or with software or whatever, that I guess I don't always think about, but it's kind of comes naturally with this, is that experiential learning is iterative, right? It's not just a one and done thing, right? So with the design, right, you learn a little bit, you kind of put in, you apply some skills, toward a bigger project, but then you look at it and reflect and critique back, and then kind of go, then go back through that process. And, I think that's important as well, because that's the way things work in the real world.
Yeah.
And also, we kind of frame experiential learning simply as like experiencing and reflecting. But there's actually 2 other parts to it. Experiencing something that happens and then making a hypothesis from that by thinking about and observing the observations that you've had, then, experimenting with that, and then reflecting on the results of the experiment. So while you're doing and reflecting, they're a little bit different, but it is also cyclical, right? Because once you get done with an experiment, reflect on it, you're probably doing some more observation that helps you to then come up with an expansion of the hypothesis.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because that's exactly where my mind was going with it too. And I would ask you, Eric, one of the things that really drew me to Ward and Wise at the Software Guild, and actually, you, Mike, at the time when I first met them, I didn't realize that you were involved with that as well, was that as we were building the Excel Center, we were looking around through the entrepreneurship community to find some of the best examples of startups and innovators in the area. And there was nothing that captivated me more than the Software Guild, because they were doing experiential learning in such a major and, in my mind, paradigm shifting way. And so in that idea of iteration, Ward, from when you started the Guild at the first year to kind of where it ended, what kind of things did you guys change about it that because of those iterations, what happened? What grew over time?
That's a good question. I think that, when we started, when we started the Software Guild, I was not too far into my teaching career, right? And I had a good gut feel of, how to teach and what worked for me and those kinds of things, but I didn't really have a good framework and kind of an official, right, the authoritative framework to put this in. And once we started working with Mike and started working with some people from the education side of things, we were able to do a couple things. One, we could put a name to some of the things that we were doing. But 2, what Mike was able to show us, with his background in instructional design and some of the other, people that we worked with that were from that world, was how to take these things and really, use some learning science and those kinds of things to really enhance it. So, for example, one of the things that we really looked at were the difference between summative and formative assessments, which in the formative assessments kind of speak to what Mike was saying, these experiments, right? I'm going to try it, I'm going to fail, I'm going to break it, I'm going to do these things, right? And they're low stakes, and you just go and do and fail and fix and try, right? And, so we formally built those into the system. And, the other thing was then, spaced repetition, where, it kind of gets back to this thing that you're not done, right? It's just don't go through the stuff one time, go through the stuff one time, come back expose, the participants to that information a little bit later, have them feed that back in. So you're, kind of reinforcing things over time. That's not necessarily, specific to experiential learning, but those were some of the things that we learned along the way that we were able to put into the programs to really help that. And then, the last thing Mike, it was really interesting. We talk about, especially with software development, what you described with the, I'm going to see it, I'm going to form a hypothesis, that's the scientific method, right? That's exactly the scientific method. And, which makes sense, right? Because that's how, we learn as a society, we get more and more scientific knowledge. It makes a lot of sense, right? That's really what experiential learning is.
And it's also the core of the design thinking methodology.
Right.
So, Mike, you mentioned that design thinking methodology. How do you actually take design thinking and apply that to some more mundane subjects? For anybody out there that's maybe watching this that is interested in creating something using experiential learning on something that might be a little less, a little less captivating, or there aren't many fun and interesting ways to teach something, how would you apply that to really spice something up and make it more memorable?
With my background as, creative writer, just a creative type in general, it's really kind of the narrative that you're setting, right? Where do we talk about that with building the need, right? If I can frame 2 + 2 in an interesting, intriguing scenario where there's actual consequences for solving the problem, I think that's the way to really, make that happen. Because there are some subjects there, not that they're not interesting in and of themselves, but they may not be that interesting to the person who needs to learn that skill, right? And I think that's one of the challenges that we have, especially in K-12 is really having engaging content for everybody, where there's more meaning, where the learning, and I think this is part of experiential learning, right? Where the learning is the means to an end and not the end.
Right.
So with experiential learning, we have this problem that we're trying to solve. In order for us to solve this problem, that through a narrative or whatever, we've created an actual emotional need to solve it, then the learning just becomes easy. And I don't want to say easy, but the learning becomes fun and worth the challenge, right? Because all learning is hard.
Motivation, right?
Yeah.
And Mike and I have really been working on this a lot with the workshops that we've been creating lately. Is what's your why? Like, right. Why are you here? Because if you can answer the why, right? If you can supply the why, we can supply the how. And that's going to work out really well because you're internally motivated to learn this because there's something you want to do. And, I liken it to like football, right? So my son's going out for football this year. Well, the why is Friday night, right? It's Friday night lights. You're going to play that football game. Everybody wants to be the football hero. You want to play the game. You better have a good why because two-a-days suck, right? Two-a-days are no fun at all. Right. And so to get through two-a-days, you got to look at Friday night, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about with experiential learning. What's your Friday night and what motivates you to want to learn this? Because sometimes it might not be fun.
Yeah, that applies a lot, I think, to when I'm out communicating to businesses. Why DriveIT does what it does is because, you've heard of things like software as a service. What I say, and, at the risk of being cliche, but I think we're honestly selling outcomes as a service. And that why, that urgency is the desire to be, the data scientist, to be the person that's actually able to do things within an organization that people talk about and dream about, but no one or few people actually have the skills to do. And because the skills to get there are hard, but if you can put them in that frame, like you say, Mike, they become fun. They become an activity. It's fun. I like how you use the word, Mike, consequences, putting consequences around the problem. And what are the best things that either of you've seen? I guess either of you take this one. What are the best things you've seen that really make an experiential learning program memorable, that really have can make it something that changes lives? Maybe not, taking it a step beyond learning a skill, but, changes lives.
I would argue that most experiential learning requires some level of group work, group participation. It may be individual reflection on that, but I think most of what people do in a career field, at least at some point, a group has to work together to make stuff happen.
Yep.
And I think that's where a lot of the soft skills that employers, complain that students come out of college not actually having, of being able to work in a group, being able to critically think, being able to explain your thoughts behind something, being able to just communicate effectively around what it is that you're encountering as working through a problem.
Being able to lead.
I'm sorry?
Being able to lead.
Well, being able to lead, but just being able to be a participant who contributes to a solution, right? I always tell my students there's two types of people in the world, right? People who solve problems and people who make problems. And if you want to stay employed, you should probably be the person who's actually solving problems. And the only way to do that in a team is to be an effective communicator. And the only way to be an effective communicator is to be able to be articulate with your thoughts and observations. And the only way to do that is to write some stuff down in the moment. That could just be gobbledygook that at some point you're going to form into an email or a memo or something, or even a video or something that you're going to say later on.
Right. Well, and, Mike, I think it is important that group work, like you said, even if the reflection itself is individual, I think being in that group and just hearing other people's points of view help you reflect on, okay, well, I'm not the center of the universe, right? And that really helps with that. I think the other thing is, right, with the experiential learning, and this may be obvious, right, but there has to be some interaction, right? Because I don't think you can do experiential learning by just watching a video, right? And I think it really helps to have the interaction. And so the other thing that means is that you must be fully present, right? You have got to be in the moment. You've got to be there. It's got to be synchronous, at least part of it, not all of it, right? But there's got to be this synchronous, I am present in the moment part of that I think is essential to experiential learning.
So in what ways, kind of to bring this full circle, do you think, Eric, that experiential learning, the business case for that, and what the areas that we're trying to engage with DriveIT, what things about experiential learning do you think really can set companies apart if they kind of make these investments in their people?
Well, I think one of the things that comes to mind as we're working with subject matter experts and we're putting these things together, we kind of go through and we always look at what do we want the outcome to be first, right? So we always kind of go through backwards design, and then that allows us to make sure we know what the what is. But as we do that, as the participant is moving through, one of the things we do at the end is we give them some reflection questions. And those reflection questions are directly applicable to their career and to their team and to what they're doing, right? So we're asking them, you have this new skill, you have this new nugget of knowledge, and that's great. But let's not leave it in a vacuum. How does this play, next week when you go back to work? How does this apply to, what you want to do at work? How does this further your goals? Those kinds of things. And so, again, like Mike said, you take it, you start writing down that reflection, it's going to form, right? And just that act is going to, kind of put that, okay, how can I apply this? I think that's really important rather than just kind of learning a skill in a vacuum. We want people to think about how that works. So I think that's one way. I mean, there's several other things that we do, with that kind of level set, and we, obviously make sure that the skills are relevant and those kinds of things. But I think that's one of the major pieces.
Yeah, and I think too, going back to how we're designing some stuff here, within the chunk of time that we have for a session, Ward, you and I have had the conversation, we need to make sure that there's enough time for reflection, because I'd rather somebody only get partially through an activity, but have the time to think about what they had done versus just working to get done and not having any time. Because, the big piece of experiential learning is that reflection.
Right.
Well, I think that's a great place to kind of wrap this one up, and definitely come back to this subject in more specific ways later. And I think the last thing that I would say, as a parting comment is, if someone were to say they wanted to come to a place like DriveIT or to another, training provider and they wanted to learn data science and they wanted to learn something about SQL, a computer coding language and application, one of the things, there are people out there that do that. And how would you say quickly and simply that the DriveIT experience would make it a better investment for your company than going to any other kind of traditional training modality? Is there something that you can say that really can drive that home? Because, that's, I think, what sometimes is on people's mind when you're asking them to do something different than what they've done for many, many years with traditional training. Go somewhere for a week, go to a conference for a few days. What's that captivating bottom line?
Well, I'd say there's a couple things, and Mike, I'm sure you have some ideas as well. But I think that for one, and this is feedback we've gotten from participants here. One goes with the experimentation kind of piece of this, is that this is a safe place to play, to experiment, to fail, and you're not going to be, it's a safe place to ask questions and interact and that kind of thing, right? So that's one thing on it. And I think the other big thing that we really strive to do in every single one of our workshops is help you build a framework on which to hang this new knowledge that you have. We're not just going to throw knowledge at you in little chunks and have you organize it, but we're going to help you place this in the universe of knowledge, place this in where you're at in your job, where you're at in your career, and help you make sense of it and help you make sense of the patterns that you're seeing. So I would say those are the two big ones.
Yeah, and fully agreeing with that, but then also talking about value, right? Students are very, very, very good at determining what is valuable, whether you're a high school senior or a 20-year veteran going to a training somewhere, right? I think the way we present our assessments, summative, informative assessments, the projects along the way, they can easily be seen as to how they would apply to somebody's day-to-day and save them time and or money. And there's where people find the value, right?
Right, I agree.
Well, thank you guys. This has been a lot of fun. And until next time, visit www.driveit.io.
All right. Thanks, Ian.
Later, guys.